Thing you like, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That's what they're, yeah, turning into.
Carry on. So,
I tell you. There's so much to legislate. He presents so much that, you can do. Um, I mean, there's been a lot of legislating for souls ancient souls that come into court and, it's like preach the gospel. And before you even open your mouth, before you get it out, they're on their knees saying Jesus is Lord. I mean, I've seen multitudes just fall on their face with the desire to claim him as Lord. And it's just, it brings, you would think in the heavenlies you don't cry, but it brings tears to your eye,
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's quite a deep emotional experience when you see people respond having been trapped, or not trapped exactly, but there because of their own choices or whatever it might be, but then to respond, it is an emotional thing. Yeah.
Mike, and it's not even choices. I mean, a lot of it is just lack of knowledge. They just were never even presented the opportunity.
Yeah.
And now they are, because God is just. And I'm like, wow. Yeah. I was talking to some dear ones in South, the beauty of Facebook. Everybody's down on Facebook right now because of, the current issues. But I have established some wonderful relationships because of Facebook. And I'm just not down on it. I mean, privacy, give me a break. I read 1984. Privacy is out the window a long time ago. Just don't put anything out there you don't want anybody to know. I mean, that's the thing. So, I was talking to them and they were talking about, could I pray and intercede for the father who has had a bad toothache and on and on. And I said, I have a son who's severely mentally impaired, he'll be 34, he can't talk. And with all my own teeth issues, that's the one thing that brings me to tears all the time. The thought of him having a toothache and not being able to tell anyone. And as I was saying that, even tears started flowing then. And I'm not one to easily cry, except when the Lord touches me. He started giving me revelation about the tears that are collected in the vials and the salt covenant, and to keep crying for this because it moves him to keep my son from experiencing such. And I'm like, wow, there is something about tears and salt covenant that we have yet to understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I am not, me for years, you've been ministering and teaching me and mentoring me for years. So you have an idea of my call. An intercessor per se is not one of them, except the role that the Lord had. Many years ago, he gave me the experience of watching him at Gethsemane. I was there watching this. And when the angels came to minister to them, they took me with them. After he said, let this cup pass, if not your will, God.
Yeah.
And there's something about that that's just bubbling in me now. And maybe that's part of the intercessory call, It's not my, if the cup can pass, Lord, please. But if not, use me. I freely give you my will. I lay all my own free will down to you. You cannot usurp my will, Lord. Use me where you need to. And it's just amazing.
Yeah, I think when we're in that place of surrender, God can use us in any situation and for any purpose. And it may not be what we primarily think of ourselves as, but I mean, I've done so many different things that were awe-inspiring and made me wonder and things. And, I would have definitely not seen myself in any sort of intercessory type role in the past. But how you do it is different. You're not doing it from a place of pleading with God because trying to drag something out of him. You're in a place of knowing the desire of God to bless and to love people and to engage people. And so you're coming out of a different experience, really, I think. And for me, you know, my carrying things in my heart and having a heart for people or groups or different things, you know, it was something, you know, I really wasn't that type of person. But the more I've engaged with the love of God, the more the love of God has inspired me to look at other people, other situations, the world itself, you know, the creation itself, from a perspective of God desires to restore this. You know, I'm an ambassador with a ministry and a word of reconciliation to help people see this amazing, wonderful God who has restored them already from his perspective, has reconciled them to himself from his perspective, and is just wanting that word of reconciliation to turn people's situation around so that they'll realize what he's already done. So the intercession is not trying to get God to do something for someone that almost like he doesn't want to do, but it's to help people see what he's already done. You know, it was while we were yet sinners that Christ died for us, you know, and he has reconciled the whole of the cosmos to himself. And, you know, everyone died in Adam and everyone has been made alive in Christ. You know, so much, you know, the finished work of the cross, you know, is an awesome thing. And we just want to get people to realize what that work is so that they can benefit from it and experience it and come into the wonderful revelation of it and live in it. You know, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. I think that is such a key understanding for us. And when it comes then to our intercession or our standing in the gap for people or whatever we're doing to those that we really love and we're called to engage with, we're doing it from a different perspective and doing it from that perspective of looking to introduce them to what God has already done, not try and get God to do something for them. You know, and that for me is the difference that I've seen over the last few years of my experience of going deeper with God, deeper in his love, realizing how much he loves people, how much his love will never fail, that he will never give up. That message carries with it a totally different connotation for me. And therefore, you know, I long to be an ambassador to people that will then help them to come into their sonship and into what God has already done for them. You know, and the message therefore is such a positive message. You know, it's such a positive thing to talk to people about what he's already done, whereas it used to be such a negative thing because it was always focusing on those people's separation or where those people weren't, you know, and what they didn't have, rather than introducing them to what God has done for them so they can just begin to engage that in that way. You know, and therefore everything in terms of sharing the gospel, sharing the good news now becomes an experiential, hey, come and meet this God, you know, come and meet the Father, come and engage with him because he'll reveal himself to you. Just give him an opportunity to unveil himself and you will then have a change of mind. You know, faith will arise from him revealing himself to you. It's his faith. He's giving you the ability to believe, to experience. Just give him a chance. You know, do you trust God then to do what he was going to do? You know.
Yeah. Why do you think he collects the salt, the spiritual salt content of tears? That's what he's shown me when he collects tears. It's the salt in the tears. I have no understanding, and takes me a long time to understand what he tries to tell me. I wonder the value to him by tears.
Well, I think it's more, I mean, if you think of it as a covenant and a covenant of salt, then a covenant is an agreement. Now, every covenant is fulfilled in the new covenant. And we find every promise is now yes and amen in Jesus. So when we're then looking at all those covenantal things, that effectively now has been agreed between Jesus and God as Father. You know, we didn't make a covenant with the Father. Jesus did. We just came into that relationship on the basis of this amazing agreement that God has already made with Jesus. And so I think some of that is, therefore, when we respond to that covenant and when we respond to what Jesus has done, and then we look at people and we see that they're not in that and they're not experiencing it, the tears that it moves us to, therefore, is precious to God, because it's connecting to who he is. It's connecting our emotions, and our tears are connecting to that covenant that's been made. And I think God loves us to see and respond to people the way he does. You know, and I think it's something that it's precious for him to see how we act as his children, as representatives of him. And when he sees people, he is not unmoved. He has been moved with the deepest moving you could ever get in terms of love. And I think when he sees us respond in love, it's precious to him. And I think the salt, you know, covenantal aspect of it, you know, is a sense it's fulfilled in the new covenant. And now people can come into that new covenant relationship, you know, because they've been seeded with salted in that way. You know, so I think there's probably a lot more to understand about it. I agree. But I think it's so much about how we are being Jesus to people, how we're reflecting the love of God to people, and how he's moved and how it should move us. You know, we shouldn't be unemotional when it comes to people not having all that Jesus has done for them. And to me, that's the sadness that I feel, because it's not that Jesus hasn't done it. He's already done it. What I feel sad is these so many people are missing out on what is already theirs. And I'm moved by that. And I want people to respond to what he's already done and receive everything that belongs to them as their inheritance. So for me, that's what I feel when you know, the sadness or the moving is really on the basis of people just missing out and not being in that. And I think, you know, God collects those tears because they are precious to him, because they reflect his heart. You know, those tears are a reflection of his heart towards people. And he longs for people to come into a relationship and a deeper relationship and to experience it. You know, and as he longs for that, and when we long for it, I think there is an emotional connection, which, you know, brings joy to his heart, and is precious to him, because it's like, well, here are my ministers of reconciliation. Here are my ambassadors of reconciliation who are looking to see everyone reconciled and restored and made whole and brought into this amazing relationship that we have.
So you know you just made me cry some more, right?
Yeah, but it's such a moving thing, isn't it? When you realize how deep the love of God goes, you know, how wide, how high, how deep, the breadth of it, you know, and we can never escape it. Where can we go? We can't go anywhere. Nothing can stop his love. You know, nothing we do, nothing created, nothing that's ever happened, nothing ever will happen, including anything we can possibly do, can ever stop God loving us, his children. And that is everyone he's created, not just those who know him and love him back, but he loves everybody that he's ever created. And no one can escape that love. They may experience it in different ways, but he loves unconditionally. And his love is not based on, obviously, our performance. Otherwise, we would have a big problem if it was based on our performance. But it's based on his nature, his very person, who he really is, love. You know, he is love.
Yeah, people talk about going to a place where the love of the Father isn't. And I go, well, where is that?
Yeah.
He's everywhere.
Yep. He is. He is, and his love is everywhere, and he wants everyone to truly experience the reality of that love. And, you know, it is sad that people end up in a place where they don't know that love, even though they're in it. And I think this is, to me, the consuming fire of his presence that people end up in is his love, but they don't know it. And I think that is, for me, the saddest thing. I feel when I go to that place myself, and when I preach the good news there, and when I go there, that's the sort of the deepest thing in my heart, is that people are there and they don't know the love of God. I mean, I can remember being in numerous places of fire myself, and if I didn't know the love of God, it would have absolutely scared me. And even then I was shaking with, you know, trepidation in one sense of facing the fire of God's presence, but I knew he loved me, and I was willingly embracing it, because I knew this was an expression of his love to purify and refine me and put me in the crucible, which would, you know, bring me into that place of wholeness and oneness, and deal with my scroll, and let the fire of his eyes purify all those experiences, being on the altar and all that. And I know the love of God, and I know what must it be like for those who do not know the love of God, even actually that they're in the fire and consuming fire of his love, but they don't know it. I think that's the anguish of soul that I've seen from people, and that does move me. You know, I mean, I went there a couple of days ago, and I was given a mandate to go to engage certain people groups, and I went, and I thought, well, I just feel so ill-equipped to be able to share with people who have such amazing experiences in their life, but never really discovered the source themselves as a person. So I went to the weapons house in the chancellor's houses. I went to the weapons house, and I was given this sort of like spear of light. You know, it was like a spear of destiny. It was a spear of light. And I carried this spear, and I went to engage people in the fire, and I had this spear, and I just moved to declare who Jesus was, you know, who he said he was. And every declaration was like lightning bolts coming out of this spear of light, penetrating the hard hearts of people, and penetrating the veils of deception that were around them. And this was particularly a group of people like the New Age people who, you know, were looking for something, but never really discovered the reality of it. And it was so amazing. And every time my spirit just released a declaration, you know, like Jesus's I am statements, you know, I am the bread of life. And as I declared that, it was like a lightning bolt went out and penetrated people's hearts there. And then I declared, you know, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection and the life. And every declaration was just, it was just amazing. You know, I just felt, and it was so powerful that these lightning bolts of truth were able to penetrate the veils of darkness that were over the minds and hearts of those people. And so many of them responded. You know, it was because the truth penetrated the deception and the lies and the veils. And I thought, wow, I wonder how many more weapons there are for different people groups that I can go and get. But this was one that, you know, really moved me. You know, I was so moved with people just being deceived into not knowing the love of God. Now, this was in the spiritual realm. This was actually in the fire of God's presence to people who had already had died physically, but their souls were in the fire of God's presence. And I went there with this spear of destiny, which was light. I mean, it was really powerful. But I can see that we could use the same application in this realm and use it as a spiritual tool, in a sense, to penetrate the veils of people, maybe when we're legislating and we're legislating with that spear to decree and declare who Jesus is, that would penetrate into their dreams or in through the veils of their darkness with visions and with angels or whatever. I think we could use it that way to legislate. So I have it as a new tool to use, and so I'm sure I will use it in different circumstances in that way to release lightning bolts, because I've seen lightning bolts, coming out of heaven, and I've legislated for them before. I just didn't have the spear in my hand. So now I've got it. I probably will go back and re-legislate some of those things I had before with a greater sense of authority, I guess, using that.
Yes. So many people say, okay, rise above, you're seated in heavenly places, rise above all of this. Because, I find myself oftentimes walking on the earth with these thigh-high boots, the sewer is being drained, but what about the septic tank, and what about the sewage? I mean, the swamp is being drained, but, so I'm walking around and rise above it, and I'm like, I do. And he puts me back because he says he wants the soles of my feet to walk the earth, to release, from my hands and my mouth and my eyes and the river from the belly and the soles of my feet. And I'm like, I just want to rise above and do the spiritual things. And he's like, no, bring the spiritual to the earth too. Absolutely. And I'm like, wow. So, you can actually take those weapons he gives you and walk like a giant across the plane of this earth, doing the same thing.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. I mean, really, thigh-high boots, like they do when they're, doing cranberries. It's like, I don't even want my feet to touch some of this stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, right now, we have this government, the whole fake news and the Fox News and how news is manipulating and molding and, certain governmental decisions. You hear this whole new report they're doing about the rapture coming on April 23rd. I'm like, oh Lord, what do you want me to do? We don't need any crazy manipulation going on right now about April 23rd. It's like, okay, pull your boots up, Pamela.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that, the enemy loves to produce fear and that type of thing. He thrives in that sort of darkness and fear and trepidation, and it's like, I guess it's been a few months since the last rapture was supposed to come. That was usually, I think wasn't that September when all the planets were aligned or something? That was the last time I heard people were, there's a rapture's coming now. Okay, we're on the 23rd of April, are we? Okay. Well, that one will come and pass as well.
Yeah, it just, the thing is, what will it cause people to do? So, I have to legislate. I don't have to. I'm volunteering. He's clear that there are things I don't have to do, but I'm like, use me, please. I will do this if you want me to.
Yeah.
And, you just legislate and remove the minutia, remove the veils, release peace, because we can release peace.
We can.
Peace can come from our being. And, you just release peace. And, when I say to some people, that I walk closely with, I'm like, I'm not talking to you this in fear. I'm being informative, asking you to take this information and see what he would have you do with it. There's no fear. I have no fear. I do not fear my life unto death. I have no fear of death, no fear. But I care about the innocent and the not so innocent. I care about the people who do.
Absolutely. And I think that's what God does. He cares about the people. And perfect love casts out fear. How can we bring a message of good news that's based in fear? It just makes no sense whatsoever. Perfect love casts out fear. We need to introduce people to the perfect love of God, to experience his love, to experience that amazing love that he has. Then there is no fear in that. Trying to scare people into a relationship with God makes no sense, because when they find it, he'll have to cast out all the fear that they had in the first place, because there's no fear in God. And the more we know the love of God, the less there is any chance of being afraid or having any sort of fear in that way. And I think it's a sign really of how deep the love goes when we can truly operate without a fear-based way of living. And so many people live in fear. They live in fear of death. They live in fear of sickness. They live in fear of lack. They live in fear. And all it does is worship the enemy. That's what fear does. It's a worship of the enemy, because you believe the enemy has more power to bring these fearful things upon you than you have in God to keep you safe. Which is sad, really. And there are so many Christians caught up in that fear-based existence. And sadly, again, it's like we have a message of love. We have a message of perfect love. Perfect love can cast out fear. No fear here. We don't need fear. And the fear cannot be in the presence of God. And I think so many people just have never really experienced the deep presence of God. They may have prayed a prayer, or they may have done something, or they may have experiences, but when you have a deep face-to-face encounter with the reality of God's presence and love, fear cannot remain there. Because there is no reason to fear when you know how wonderful God's love is. How amazing it is, how wide, how high, how deep, how long. It's just amazing. And that is the very nature of God himself. So,
that's the perplexity I have before him right now. I'm like, one glimpse of you is enough. Why not show, why are so few have that? What has to happen for more people to just get an inkling of who you are?
Yeah. But I think that's why we need to carry the message of reconciliation and restoration and love, and make it known. Eventually, as more and more of us are raised up obviously into the realms, operating in the realms of heaven, but raised up in the earth, and have this message and carry this message and live this message, then the more the light will shine, and the more that will draw people to the light. And therefore, so much of what we call the religious sort of institution of church and Christianity does not function in love. And therefore it is not demonstrating that. It operates in fear and legalism and bondage and works and dead works and all those things that produce fear. And that is what has been expressed. And we have to express the truth, the reality of who God is, of his very character and nature. Therefore, more and more of us who are experiencing it, I do believe God will bring opportunities to make that known. And, when the mountain of the house of the Lord is raised up, all the people come. So we're coming to the mountain of the house of the Lord because you've got the answers. The world may be struggling with fear and everything else, but you are not living like that. We're coming to find the answer. We're coming to find the word of the Lord and the love of God. And I think the more we are raised up into those positions, the more we actually are living it, demonstrating it, the more people will see it. Because, of course, God has chosen to use us. We are the ministers of reconciliation, the ambassadors of reconciliation. We are the ambassadors of love. It's just I don't think overall people have been very good ambassadors. So it's like, I don't think God is just going to suddenly appear and reveal himself in that way. He's revealing himself in us. We are his body on earth and in heaven. And therefore, it's like, it's through us that he wants to reveal the manifest wisdom, love, grace, mercy, favor, blessing of God to the world. It's us. And I think so much has been hijacked and misrepresented that amazing God that the world can't see the love, because what they see is the fear and the judgment and the stuff. You know, I mean, there's someone who used to be in these meetings who, you know, challenged me over the sort of penal substitutionary atonement issue, because we put out a blog post, you know, basically saying, you know, penal substitutionary atonement is not a biblical principle, and it's certainly not what God's like. And they took issue with that and contacted me, and they sent me a rebuttal to the article, and with all their rebuttals to why God should be seen as being angry, why he is a judging God, and why he thinks. And so it so saddened me, because I thought, I just don't think you've ever really met him if that's what you think in reality. And what I found was, when I looked into it, and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to look at this again. I'm going to take this back to God. And God, I want you to show me, you know, what, you know, am I seeing this wrongly? And of course he didn't show me I was. But, you know, what they said is, you know, you are emasculating God and you are stopping him being angry. And I thought, so you honestly believe God's angry with his children? He's not angry with us. He's angry with everything that's robbing us, which is hindering us, which is obscuring us. And penal substitutionary atonement is something he's angry about, because it is not him. Is there substitution? Of course there is. He died for my death. Is there atonement? Yes, he atoned for my death. But is there penal, retributive, angry justice? No, there isn't. Justice is restorative, based on the fact that Jesus gave himself as an offering on the cross, not to appease an angry God, but to die our death and to be a substitute for us, so that we would not have to suffer death. It is man that wants the retribution and the revenge and the vengeance. It's not God who wants that. And I was so sad. I felt so sad that that person who, you know, has a relationship with God could so miss the love of God in that way. And, you know, they said, you know, you're removing the cornerstone of our faith, as if the cornerstone of our faith is based on an angry God who needs appeasement with a sacrifice of his son. You know, and I just felt it's perfect love which is going to reveal God, not this angry, substitutionary, child-abusing God. You know, that the world does not want that God. It's rejected that God and is still rejecting that God, which is why we have to present the reality of who God really is in love. And does that mean that God doesn't get angry? Of course not. But his anger is motivated by love, and his anger is not against his people. It's against those things that are stopping us experiencing his love. You know, and when you look at Hebrews 12 and you see that God disciplines those he loves, God doesn't punish those he loves. He disciplines, he disciples, he corrects. And even the word punishment itself, the primary root of that word, which is kalasis in Greek, is a pruning, it's a chastising, it's a correcting, not a punishing and tormenting. The very word itself says chastisement. So if I was going to chastise my children, would I be dishing out my anger on them in punishment? Well, if I did, I would be a very bad dad, because I would be appeasing my anger rather than trying to help my children by correcting them and by disciplining them in a discipleship relationship way, not by heaping out my punishment on them. And it's like, why would I treat my children in a way that God doesn't treat me? Of course I'm going to treat my children, and I would want to discipline them, yes, but out of love, so that they would be corrected, not that they would receive my punishment. And whenever I did, sometimes you get so frustrated with your kids, you know, I used to, in that way, when they do things that are just like, and if you try and discipline them to appease your anger and frustration and annoyance, then you're not demonstrating love to them. Love cannot be demonstrated in punishment and anger. It isn't love if it is. You know, whenever I did, you know, punish my children, it was because it was there to appease my frustration and anger. And that is always wrong. And it was always wrong when I did it. And I know several times I had to go back to them and apologize for the way I did what I did in trying to correct them. Because it was much more about me feeling angry and expressing that to them than it was expressing love. And I had to apologize. And God is not going to have to apologize for ever punishing anybody, because he doesn't. He loves, and love is his motivation for everything he does, including our discipline to correct and train and equip us, to disciple us in love. You got your hand up there, Patricia? Go for it.
I do have my hand up.
You do.
I was asking Holy Spirit how much I can share. So years ago, there was a prophet that came to the church I was attending. And he said to me, he says, there's been a meeting in hell to literally destroy you. And I break the power of that today. Well, you know, I would really hate to think what would have happened if he didn't break the power of that. Because it's been one trip. And sometimes I wonder if I came into agreement with that. But all in all, I have gone through the processes of feeling the fear without knowing for sure that God still loved me. You know, I think when we as believers, after all the lies we've been told that believers don't have to suffer, you know, I think we have, you know, mixed emotions about this God that we serve, but we forget about being partakers of the sufferings of Christ. And his suffering was for souls. And one of the things that I've had to deal with is astral travelers. If you know anything about them, they operate via witchcraft, you know, and I won't go into all of that detail. So I've gone through several things, and but God, in his mercy, reached out to my one-word prayer, which was help, because I had nothing else to say. And, you know, that's been a few years back. But he's always faithful to meet us where we are if we just cry out with that one word. That's enough for him. And so I'd gotten past the place of fear in what I was going through, where the Lord changed my heart and I started operating from a place of love, and which I would not trade for the world. It was a hard process, but I would not have traded it for anything. And I remember the first time I prayed for these astral travelers. They didn't like it. And without, I don't understand a lot of things about the network, but I would get certain headlines in emails because being an astral traveler, they know pretty much everything there is to know about what you do, what your email address is, what your credit card number is, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's no privacy when there's astral travelers around. And but as I continued to pray for these, which I was calling my enemies, but they were in reverse. They were doing a great work within me because they just pushed me more into the Father's heart. And I learned the word tenacity. And, I'm really skipping a whole lot that you could read between the lines and gather. One day I was praying for them, though, and in one of these email headings, which I don't open the emails, but in the headings of the email, it basically said that there are those that are weak, so weak, they're barely able to breathe. Talking about the very ones that I'm praying for, and that my prayers were actually saving them and changing them, and their place of bondage was so strong that they were barely able to hold on. So that put a new perspective on what I could not see, that even though in the beginning my prayers were fault and I was fault because of the prayers, they eventually started breaking through those hard hearts to the fact where the scripture says he will make our enemies to be with us and not against us. And through the season, I can, and there's been days specifically directed by the Holy Ghost to offer salvation, to offer an invitation to receive Christ to these same ones. So while we may not understand some things going on in our lives, we cannot underestimate the power of what is going on behind the scenes. If we suffer a little, think it's for the good of the souls. It's to better us and to bring us closer into the Father's heart. There's always a purpose in suffering if we allow ourselves to find the good in it. And the fact that these people were now saying, hey, some of us are so weak, we're barely able to breathe, means that they're crying out for help. And so it puts a whole perspective for me in that all things work out for my good. It definitely, all things work out for my good. If I allow God to change me, then I can be that ambassador to pray for others and to allow them to be changed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting, when we think of God's vengeance, his vengeance is to turn those who think they're his enemies into his friends. I think the classic example of God's vengeance is Saul of Tarsus becoming Paul. It's like, here's someone murdering Christians and out to completely, destroy the church. And God turns him around, reveals that he's been at work in him, and shows him the reality of Jesus And all of a sudden, Paul, who perceived he was an enemy to the church, now was a friend. And, and I think that is the greatest demonstration of love. Jesus said, even so good people will love those who love them. What about those who don't love you? What are you going to do with them? And there's this whole sense of, well, how does God deal with them? Loves them, loves them, keeps loving them, never stops loving them. So yeah, there's allowing, seeing the process of things happening, trials, tribulations, troubles, different things that we go through, embracing them as an opportunity for transformation, rejoicing through them, is, and in the end, the strength of God to go through it when we can rejoice with the right attitude and love people who are not loving us. That is the key. That's when Jesus turns everything around. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now I'm totally changing this whole concept because you got it totally wrong. Now love your enemies and pray for those who treat you wrongly. Totally different dynamic. And when you do that, it empowers, obviously God empowers you and changes you and transforms you through the process. So it is a very transformatory process when you embrace the trials and walk them through with Jesus, who never leaves you on your own through those sort of trials. They have powerful changing effects in us and also in the people that we then, as you say, pray for and minister to and are ambassadors to, even those who are perceivably think that they're our enemies. So, yeah, Pam, you've got your hand up there.
Yeah, I want to share an encounter that I don't tell too many people about. Again, I wasn't raised in church, but he did send me to a Bible college, like a Kenneth Hagin based Bible college to get a foundation in me. So I was really grounded in the idea of the rapture from that training, from that teaching. And I was just worshiping him one time, just minding my business, hard open worshiping. And he came and all he said was, if I asked you to stay, would you? And I broke down sobbing because I knew he was talking about the rapture. I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? What do you mean? And I'm sobbing. He said, if I asked you to stay, would you? And I'm like, yeah, I'd stay for you. I'd stay for you, Lord. If it's you, I'd stay for you. And that wasn't even good enough for him because he spent that whole week circumcising my heart. Sobbing to the point where all I could do was, eventually I said, I will stay for them. I will stay for them. And that was what he wanted. And then it, all of that lifted. But it was a circumcision of my heart. And even now, sometimes he'll hover over me. I'm like, what are you doing? He said, I'm adding meat tenderizer. I'm adding meat tenderizer. And I'm like, oh, okay, where am I wrong? What did I do? What should I change? But it's not even, I will stay for you. I will stay for the least of them.
Yeah.
And that was under my, under the teaching of how bad tribulation was going to be. I mean, he's changed my whole idea of thoughts of the rapture. But at that point, just even the thought of enduring tribulation was like, I was on my face sobbing and heaving. What are you talking about? What do you mean? You want me to what? It was crazy. And that has not changed. I would stay, I would stay for the least now. So.
And that's truly being an ambassador, isn't it? That's truly representing his love because of the way he feels towards people, the way he loves them, his experience in that love. So, yeah, awesome.
Circumcision of the heart is a real experience. It's painful, but it's a real experience.
It is. Yeah, and it happens in different ways to different people, but everyone has to go through it. If our hearts aren't circumcised, then actually we are going to live self-centeredly. Ultimately, what we do may be for God, but it also is for us. And that's really the detail of the dark cloud, and basically surrendering the soul and the needs of the soul, and the independence of the soul. I mean, all those things are all part of that circumcision process. And I guess we probably go through different phases of it. When I look back on my life and all the different phases of when God was doing what he could do, at that point. And then he would then go deeper and take it deeper, take it deeper, take it deeper, until in the end, are you really going to surrender? Are you really going to trust me? And for me, that was the real turning point in my journey, really, because before that, because of my soul's needs, I was restricted on what I could do and where I could go and what I could engage in. And when that soul and spirit got separated and reintegrated and brought back together and brought into oneness and into wholeness and into agreement, then everything changed. And now, God was free to show me the things he always wanted to show me, but I wasn't able to see because of my own ego, really, and the needs that it would have given. I would have used those things in a way which had mixture in there, and he wanted to purify my heart, circumcise your heart, and whatever terms you use, but it is a process of deep suffering. Actually, it is, but really what we're doing is joining in with the sufferings of the cross and seeing the victory across applied to our lives. I don't have to kill myself. I've already died with him, but I do need to surrender to that and allow him to outwork that in my life. But it's Patricia was saying she would go through every process again. I would, however painful or difficult those things were. And often the pain is having to face yourself and the reality of what you're really like without God. And it's like what you are as a, self-conceived person, whether it's self-esteem or, self-worth or all those things that come from self, which is, the very nature of the word. When you recognize it, it obviously isn't very nice, is it? To have to admit, am I really like that? When I did the trading floors of my heart, it was just like, did I really have that motive? Oh yeah, I did. I used to have those motives. It's just like, that's terrible. You don't feel very good, but actually because the love of God, that he's not looking at it from a terrible perspective. He's just seeing, hey, I'm glad you've seen this now. Now we can get rid of this stuff. Now you don't need to operate that way because you got me. And it is a wonderful thing, but it is a hard process, and the harder we resist it, the more we resist it, the harder it is. And that's really why I want to encourage people to, hey, surrender, don't fight, don't resist, just surrender, because when you surrender, change and transformation will take place. So, yeah. Okay. So, anyone else got anything they want to share or ask? Yeah. No one got anything?
Well, I'm sorry I'm late. I had
okay.
traffic, so I didn't feel like jumping on that call in traffic. I thought that's not responsible. But I missed obviously the beginning of that, but God has been taking me really, really, really deep into his heart, into those that have been struggling in mental illness. And what he's showing me is that people have built self-defense systems that are almost impenetrable in an effort to protect themselves, really to protect that core being who belongs, that original self, I guess, that belongs to God. And so, when we look at even so much of physical illnesses that is coming from the places that were walled off in our heart, and we're looking to the Lord to heal something that is a self-defense mechanism instead of a sickness or a disease. And so really, really taking me deep into those beginnings of trust with him. And I don't have the fullness of what happened here, but Saturday, or actually Friday night into Saturday, I ended up in this place inside of God that the only way I think I could describe it would be the womb of God. I almost feel like I wasn't even breathing from my mouth. It was like there was just this place of being. I don't even have words to describe what it was like, but I came out of it with just such a understanding of that surrender to love. And that we really can't you cannot intellectualize love. Love is felt. It has to be through touch. It has to be through the sensory system for love to come in. And really the only thing standing between us is that are trying to intellectualize that. And you just can't. You have to, it's something you can only receive. And I just feel like God is directing us where we're going is to really help people understand that the only thing standing between them and him is the defense system that we built to protect ourselves from conditional love and from hurts and pains, and helping them find that spot and stay there. Don't move. Because we get ahead of ourselves, and he needs that that place inside of him where we just receive. When you think about an infant that comes home from the hospital, they don't come home with a book about how to love mom and dad. They learn how to love by being loved. And so there's this time capsule of a place with God that every person, my belief is every person has to get to that place to so trust him that we'll lay down our intellect and just let him be our dad, let him be in charge, let him lead and guide and direct and teach all things.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Funnily enough, I went to sounds like the same place last night. We had a group meeting and we just did an activation and engaged, and I ended up felt in exactly the same place, like in the womb, but being just like a baby there and just being loved unconditionally, because a baby can't do anything. And I felt I was just there, and it was such a deep sense of peace and love. I almost sort of didn't come back out of it. It was such a place. It's like, oh, I don't want to leave here. But I don't have to leave there, of course, because I can live in it. Even though, it was an encounter, I that can be part of me and that whole dimension of it. But it did feel like a womb. That's what it felt like. Deep right into the because that's what God said. He said, I went into the Father's garden, and the God said, look, this isn't deep enough. You need to come deeper. So, then it was going back deeper and deeper and deeper into the Father's heart until I was just in this place of total peace, total surrender, but totally just being in the midst of love. It was an amazing experience. And I think, if people could have that experience, it would totally change their lives. So we want to introduce everyone to that type of experiencing the love of God and powerfully being touched by the love of God.
And just staying there,
Yeah, living from it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okie dokie. All right. Okay. I'm going to leave it there because I've got to